Hey y'all, welcome to today's show. You may have noticed it's been several days since I've been able to do a podcast, and you probably know why. We got hit real hard with a hurricane in western North Carolina, and internet power have been sketchy. It's just been really difficult to get things done. So things are getting a little more back to normal now. It's been about 2 weeks, and I'm going to pick up where we left off. We'll start as usual with radio replies. And this time, the questioner who is questioning the priests about the papacy seems to have a real problem with Italians. I think it sounds like an English guy to me. He just doesn't seem to like Italians very much. But he says, it is a well-known fact that all real missionary enterprise is carried on by Protestants of England and America. And I say that is untrue. For over 3 centuries, Protestantism could not inspire the thought of foreign missions. And it's actually true. Okay, so Protestantism is around 500 years old. For the first 300 years, there were really no such thing as Protestant missionary activities. That's only really a phenomenon of the last 200 years or so. Catholic Church has been around for 2,000 years and has been conducting missionary activities from day one. They say the Catholic Church was missionary from the very beginning and has ever retained that characteristic. In any case, where are the English and American Protestant missions in Italy, Spain, Germany, Austria, Russia, etc.? Do not these Europeans deserve the truth? The Catholic Church is in all countries. Person says, I don't agree with foreign missions at all. It is better to leave the natives as they are. The missions do more harm than good, causing physical suffering and mental distress. And if you go to college these days, that's exactly what you'll be taught. It's absolutely untrue, and they answer it, your opinion cannot avail against Christ's command to the church that she must go to teach all nations. Christianity, in its true form of Catholicity, gives many help to the attaining of eternal salvation. And it is certainly better to have those helps than not to have them. Any harm which seems to follow missionary enterprise is due to the vices of so-called Christian traders and adventurers, to the introduction of false forms of Christianity, or to the mistake of well-meaning men. But it is never due to the spreading of Catholic doctrine as such. Pagan and even cannibal tribes, noting the beneficial effects of the coming of the Catholic missionaries, again and again send requests that they too may receive a priest to teach them. And the person says, in the name of Catholicity, you often point out that your church exceeds all others numerically. But that only disproves your case. Christ said that he scarcely expected to find faith on earth. And they said, Christ said that his church would teach all nations and go to the uttermost parts of the earth, the tiniest of seeds growing into a great tree. His words, when the Son of Man cometh, shall he find, think you, faith upon earth, refer not so much to the numbers as to the quality of belief, as context shows. And he is referring to special conditions which will prevail toward the end of time, when the charity of man shall have grown cold. Matthew 24:12. The text in no way suggests that the body of believers for all ages will be necessarily small. Christ said, though, the person continues, fear not, little flock. And they answer, the church was a little flock at the time Christ spoke, for it was in the seedling stage. But even the vast grown tree can be called a little flock. The Catholic Church is little and despised by worldly-minded men because she consists chiefly of the poor and despised. And it is always little in spirit, insisting upon humility in accordance with Christ's words. Unless you become as little children, you cannot enter the kingdom of heaven. And I think finally we get to this person's real problem. And they say, the Catholic Church preaches democracy. How many non-Italians have become pope? And they say the Catholic Church preaches not democracy, but Christian doctrine. In any case, democracy has nothing to do with your question. Democracy suggests that the lower classes are equally considered as the so-called higher classes, and as far as the papacy is concerned, democratic principles are observed. Pope Leo XIII was a prince by blood, whilst his successor, Pope Pius X, was the son of a poverty-stricken farmer. And the person says, how can you call your church Catholic when all your popes are Italians? And they say Catholicity is not measured by the nationality of a given pope. The church numbers some 400 million, If all Italians in the world died tomorrow, there would still be 350 million Catholics left. If this vast church becomes Italian because we happen to have an Italian pope, now, then it was Jewish when St. Peter was pope, and English when Hadrian IV was pope, and French under the French popes. And the person says, must not the pope always be Italian? They say no. Again, Hadrian IV was an Englishman, Martin IV was a Frenchman, Zachary a Greek, Gregory III a Syrian, Hadrian VI a Dutchman. The present pope happens to be Italian, but the cardinals could quite easily elect an Englishman next time should they think fit. And yeah, we haven't had an Italian pope in quite a while. I mean, in my lifetime, the earliest pope I remember was Pope John Paul II. Obviously he was pope for most of my childhood. Now, I think there was one pope before him, but I don't remember because I was too young and I was a Catholic and we didn't pay attention to such things. But of course, he was Polish, and then Pope Benedict XVI was Bavarian German, and Pope Francis is, where's he from? Argentina, I think, maybe. But it's interesting. One of the biggest objections of especially English Protestants is that somehow Catholicism is Italian in nature, and it's funny. It reminds me of one of my favorite old British sitcoms. I guess this one was from the 90s. Not that old, My favorite British sitcom was actually Last Summer Wine, which, of course, the English make fun of me for because they think it's like an old folk show. But, I mean, I've watched the show for like 30 years. I know every episode by heart. It's like the English version of Andy Griffith or something. I can put it on. It's peaceful. I like the characters. It's funny. And actually, it looks a lot like the mountains of North Carolina. Yorkshire looks a lot like where I live, except, right now we're underwater. And that doesn't really happen in Yorkshire. But anyway, there's a great show. If you've never seen it, do try to find it. It's called My Hero. And it was just sort of a goofy little sitcom in the 90s. And it was about this superhero, from another planet. And he's played by an Irish actor. I think his name is Ardal O'Hanlon, if I remember correctly. Anyway, more recently he's been on Death in Paradise and various other shows. But he gets this notice from the Interstellar Council or whatever that Earth's just gotten too bad. They're going to destroy the Earth. So his wife is human, and he tells her, and she's like, "You've got to do something to stop it." So kind of like who was it in the Bible? Lot. Lot that went and said, "If I can find one righteous man, will you not destroy the city?" Well, he goes to the council and says, "If I can find one redeeming quality in humanity, will you not destroy the earth?" And they say, "Yeah, you got a couple of days to do it." So he goes around, finds it, comes back, and he says, "Good news, Janet. I found one place the council will not destroy." And she says, "Oh, that's great. Where is it?" "It's Italy." "Oh, that's nice for the Italians." "Not really. It is a lovely country, but they're horrible, rude people." That's sort of like the English conception of Italians, and they not only just shared by the English. Now, I love Italians. I have many Italian friends. In fact, probably my best friend is a beautiful young lady named Melissa who lives in Italy and Umbria. Her family owned cheese businesses there for generations, and she's had enough run-ins with the mafia and corrupt court systems. She absolutely hates Italians. She's, Italian multi-generational, and she thinks Italians are the most rude, corrupt people on the face of the earth. So, I'm probably sure they're not any worse or any better than anybody else. But anyway, we'll get on to Father Sparago's exhaustive Catechism of the Catholic Church, the explanation. And we'll start on a topic that is not much discussed in our churches these days, and really should be. And of course, it's sin. And it's going to be, I guess, a three-parter on this one. I'm going to keep them brief, Really, I want to try to do this more, especially when I'm reading for Father Sparago's book or something. Keep the reading to be about 15, 20 minutes. I'm kind of I'm kind of different when it comes to the way I read books. I'll grab a book and maybe read a few pages and then get in bed at night and thinking, well, I'm going to read a couple more pages, and end up sitting up to like 4 or 5 in the morning and reading 100 or 200 pages. It's really not the best thing to do in spiritual books. I believe Thomas Kempis and St. Francis de Sales both cautioned that when you're reading a book, whether it's the Bible, whether it's a book written by a saint, whether it's the Catechism, an official Catholic book, read a couple of pages and really meditate on it. Pray about it and think about it, and take things sort of in bite-sized chunks. So I'm going to try to do that, and I think this one, we get into the first part of it today. I should be able to finish one part today, and God willing, if the power stays on, maybe next week we can finish this segment. He said, "He who wittingly and willingly transgresses one of God's commandment is guilty of sin." Adam and Eve in paradise transgressed the commandments of God. They knew it well, and no one, not even the serpent, compelled them to violate it. Thus they committed a sin. The commandments of God are principally the Ten Commandments and the precepts to do works of mercy, besides all other precepts enjoined upon us in God's name. The commandments either enjoin or prohibit some act, therefore they are divided into the sins of commission and omission. Of course, that means what you do and what you should have done, you failed to do it. As the divine law is for the safeguarding of the majesty of God and for our own welfare or the good of our neighbor, we sin in transgressing that law either against God or neighbor or ourselves. Sin is nothing else but the revolt against and disobedience to God. The sinner throws off the yoke of God, saying, "I will not serve." And that's, let's see, we just quoted Romans, or we referenced Romans 4:15, 1 John 3:4, and Jeremiah 2:20. He attacks God. He would fain destroy him, that he might no longer see and punish his transgressions. When we commit sin, we take up arms against God. We crucify again the Son of God, Hebrews 6:6, by making the Redeemer's blood of no avail. The malice of the sinner pains our Lord more deeply than all the sufferings of his passion, just as the loss of his wages is more grievous to the working man than all the toil he has gone through. How foolish it would be of anyone in the world to offend an individual on whom his whole future happiness depended. But how more foolishly do we act when we make him our enemy, whose aid is indispensable to us in all things at all times, and on whom our eternal salvation depends. If your life was in another man's mercy, would you venture to insult the man? Remember, your existence depends entirely upon the will of God. It hangs as by a thread. At any moment he could cast you back in the nothingness whence you came, and yet you do not fear to provoke his anger. Miserable mortals that we are, we cannot tolerate the slightest indignity offered to us by our fellow men, who are our equals, and yet we ourselves show the utmost disrespect to the Lord of heaven. It is not counted as a sin if we commit an evil action, of the sinfulness of which we are ignorant, through no fault of our own, nor if our will does not consent to the evil deed. Noah's intoxication was guiltless because he was not aware of the inebriating qualities of the wine. If one eat meat on Friday, forgetting that it is Friday, it is no sin. But it is quite otherwise if, in consequence of a long-continued habit of sin, one fails to see the guilt of the action, or if one's ignorance of its sinfulness is due to culpable negligence. It is one thing, says St. Gregory, not to know, and another to wish not to know. For he who closes his eyes that he may not see the truth is a despiser of the law. Those who in the present day avoid hearing sermons will have no excuse before God. We do not commit sin so long as we do not consent to what is evil. The early Christians had incense forcibly thrust into their hands and were compelled to cast it upon the altar. Were they to blame? Evil thoughts are suggested by the devil, but if we do not consent to them, we commit no sin, any more than we are responsible for what we do in our dreams. We should not allow these thoughts to disquiet us, but simply put them out of our minds. But actions done without our will most certainly are sinful, if we are to blame for the cause of those actions. The misdeeds of a drunken man are unquestionably sins, if in any way he foresees them as a consequence of his intoxication. In other words, in this case, the guy knows he's not just having a couple of drinks. He knows he's going to get drunk, and then, for instance, he knows he's going to get in a car and drive and put other people's lives in danger. That's actually a mortal sin right there. Drinking alcohol, not a mortal sin. Unintentionally having one or two too many, unless it's a habit, would be at most a venial sin. But then putting someone's life in danger and knowing you're going to do it beforehand, that compounds it, and that's certainly mortal. Sin is in its essence an unlawful turning toward the creature and turning away from God. St. Bonaventure says that turning toward creatures is the source of all sin. Earthly creatures are only the means for the attainment of everlasting felicity. That's happiness, by the way. They are in no wise the final end of man. It is with them as with drugs. Used in moderation, they can be beneficial. Of course, he means pharmaceuticals. He means medicines. Used in moderation, they are beneficial, but used immoderately, they are injurious and a hindrance in the way of our salvation. Therefore, God only allows us to use creatures within a certain limit, and in fact only insofar as they are necessary or helpful to our eternal happiness. For instance, he permits us to take such nourishment as is needed for the support of nature, but forbids excess in eating and drinking. He permits us to have possessions of our own, but not to take which belongs to a neighbor. He who uses creatures to a greater extent or otherwise than God ordains, doing violence to the creature, Romans 8:22, wanders away from God and from his final end. He prefers transient joys to eternal bliss. That's from the book of Wisdom 2:1-9. And as I always say, if you have a Bible that does not contain the book of Wisdom, you have a fake, fraudulent, and counterfeit Bible, and you need to get rid of it and get a real Bible, i.e. a Catholic Bible. Thus a child, if a lump of sugar and a piece of gold be offered to him, will choose the sugar. The sinner forsakes God, the fountain of living waters, and digs himself broken cisterns that can hold no water. Jeremiah 2:13. Sin is a species of idolatry. The sinner worships the creature in place of the Creator. His sin is his God. By sin, man becomes a servant of the creature. He becomes dependent upon creatures. He is like a fish caught upon a hook and held fast by it. Whosoever committeth sin is the servant of sin. John 8:34. I believe, that's 8. He is worse than a servant, for a servant can run away, but the servant of sin cannot escape from sin. He carries it with him wherever he goes. Sin is the only evil upon earth. It robs man of the supernatural beauty of the soul. It makes him resemble the devil and brings misery upon him even while he is on earth. Sin is the only evil in the world. Remember, God created all things and called them good. Yes, all things created by God are good. It's only through our free will that can do bad. We mortals are accustomed to regard the sufferings and contradictions of this life as evils, whereas they are graces in reality, since far from separating us from God, they bring us nearer to Him. Though through sin, man becomes worthless in God's sight, through sin, he who is made of nothing returns to his original nothingness. St. John Chrysostom says, "Many consider eternal damnation to be the greatest of all evils, but for my part, I always assert that to offend Jesus is a far greater evil. Sin is a greater evil than the annihilation of the world, nay, of millions of worlds with countless inhabitants." What an interesting way of saying it. One wonders, did Father Spirago believe in aliens? I mean, he just said millions of worlds with countless inhabitants. Did he think there were such? I don't know. The whole alien question's never really interested me, but I figure if they're out there, they're out there, and they haven't bothered us yet. I don't figure they're going to bother us in the future. But, that's me. I'm a very common sense kind of person. Father Spirago was a brilliant man. He was very knowledgeable of sciences and such, and maybe he speculated such. I don't know. I'm only speculating now. He may have just been making an analogy of sorts, expanding upon, a bit of an exaggeration, we could say. Sin is the only real disgrace. When it was said to St. Francis Xavier, the Apostle of the Indies, who bore the title of Apostolic League, that it was a degradation to him to wash his own linen, he replied, "Nothing degrades the Christian except sin. Through sin, the supernatural beauty of the soul is lost. As a white robe is soiled and stained if it comes into contact with the mud of the streets, so the soul loses her supernatural beauty, which consists in sanctifying grace, and contracts a hideous sin through the inordinate love of creatures." On someone observing St. Francis Chantal when she was nursing a leper, that she might easily take the disease, she answered, "I fear no leprosy, but the leprosy of sin. Sin renders man like the devil. Sinners are imitators and followers of the devil." Wisdom 2:25. They are made one with him by sin. He that committeth sin is of the devil. 1 John 3:8. They even become his children in sin. John 5:10. The Lord said to the Pharisees in the temple, you are of the father your devil, and the desires of your father you will do. John 8:44. Sin makes the misery of the man even while he's on earth. If the heavenly bodies forsook their orbits, they would be dashed to pieces. If the train becomes derailed, a catastrophe ensues. So God's rational creatures, the human race, are overtaken by disaster if they transgress the law of God, the law that he has laid down for them. The sinner rebels against the rules of his own reason, the rules of society, the rules that govern the universe. For this he has to endure the reproaches of conscience, the penalties of the law, and the chastisement of God. All right, we will wrap it up today, right here. And y'all, please remember to pray for the folks in Florida that are dealing with a hurricane right now, and continue to pray for us in Western North Carolina and Tennessee and Virginia and South Carolina and Georgia. We got hit really hard. We got, the weather forecasters predicted like maybe 5 inches of rain over a 48-hour period as it was moving through. It moved through quicker and dropped over 36 inches of rain, and the rivers rose 30 feet, and the devastation is indescribable. So y'all please pray for us up here, and pray for the folks down in Florida, and of course into the wars, and Ukraine and Russia and Israel and Palestine and Lebanon and all that. It's there are a lot of people suffering out there right now, big time. But we'll pick up on this and try to finish it up next week. Have a good one. Remember the words of St. Padre Pio: pray, hope, and don't worry. And I'll talk to you next time.